Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mumey, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 138 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mumey. Really pleased that you're with me today. I hope you're having a great day. And hey, listen, I hope your brackets went a whole lot better than mine did. What's up with Wisconsin? Anyway, all right. So I hope that everybody's starting to get located and kind of fixed in and starting to think about the upcoming bar exams. Believe it or not, we're almost just a little bit over 4 months until the upcoming July bar exams. So they're going to be here before you know it. Now, I know many of you are sitting waiting on pins and needles for your results from the February 2017 exams, and we're now about probably 2 to 3 weeks until the very first of those results will start to come out in some big jurisdictions like Florida and some of the UBE jurisdictions. So we're wishing good luck to everybody there, and we'll keep you updated in the podcast as results come out and what's going on and what we're learning as those results are being released. Now, today on the podcast, I wanted to share with you a discussion that I had with my students last week in our weekly Q&A for our registered students, in which I talked about the right way to use wrong answers. Kind of counterintuitive, but wrong answers actually have a lot of value when you're studying for the bar. And I wanted to share with my students and with you some thoughts about 5 different ways to use wrong answers to make them more effective for you. So I hope you'll stick around for that information and message. I think you're going to find it really useful. I also want to invite everyone that's listening today to do a couple of things. First, if this is your first time with us on the podcast, welcome. We're really glad to have you here, but we'd love to have you subscribe. This podcast comes out once a week on Wednesdays, and it's easy to subscribe. You can do that by going to Apple iTunes or to iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Or you can go to celebrationbarreview.com, click on the tab at the top that says podcasts. You'll see all of our prior episodes, as well as an opportunity there and links to be able to subscribe. That way you won't miss any of the episodes as they're coming out. The second thing I want to invite all of you to do is to join me this Thursday on March 23rd at 3 p.m. Eastern, that would be 12 noon Pacific, for our free live masterclass, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. This is a look at the 4 powerful ways to pass the bar guaranteed, and it's terrifically useful information. We've had literally several thousand people take this free live masterclass, and they've had great results. And I would hope that you would be a part of that group of people as well. Now, again, there's no cost to participate, but you do need to register. And you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com. Right on the front page there, you'll see a link to register for this Thursday's webinar. Now, if Thursday at 3 p.m. does not work for you, or perhaps you're listening to this after that date, you can always scroll down that same page on our homepage, and you will see a link for an on-demand version of the same information. And I invite you to click on that and schedule a time for yourself. The only difference between the live and the on-demand version is that I'm not there answering questions, and I think there's some magic to that, so I hope you will join us live. But if that doesn't work in your schedule, we still want you to have this information, and so you can do that by registering from our website. One of 2 ways to do that. But either way, make sure you hop in there and find out these 4 powerful ways and steps to be able to pass the bar guaranteed. Well, I don't want to keep you waiting. I'm really excited to share this message with you about the right way to use wrong answers, and I think you're going to find it really helpful. Let's jump into today's message. I got an interesting email from a former student this week that I wanted to share with you. I'm going to read the email pretty much in full because at the end, the student makes this amazing connection that I want to share and I want to go a little bit deeper on, having to do with wrong answers. So here's the email that I got. So hear this out. The former student wrote to me, I have a case that's straightforward on the legal questions, but complex in terms of the number of parties involved. My client's represented by another attorney on one portion of the case, and he referred her to seek other counsel for a part of the case. That's where I come in. So I sent a letter to the other parties and to this attorney stating our position. His boss, the first name on a long string of name partners at a huge law firm, called me today. There's a problem with your letter. Gulp. His tone was hostile, sarcastic, and condescending. Gee, when does that happen? And he explained with exaggerated patience why my letter was a completely wrong legal analysis, and then dumped it in my lap to fix the situation with all the parties. The former student says, well, I was rattled by the call and intimidated by him, but I didn't show it to him and I didn't respond. I just listened. I went to lunch alone and I thought it all through. And then I stopped by my mentor's office, a seasoned trial lawyer, and he said, you're not wrong, but how do we prove it? And he called a lawyer friend of his for advice who said, you're definitely not wrong, but what's the next step? And we all agreed that my analysis was right. The other lawyer actually was wrong, and he actually caused the problem at hand. But we're all a little stumped on what to do with all of that. Then driving home, I remembered a question that I got wrong on a school assignment. And there was the solution right in front of me. I remembered it because of a wrong answer and the struggle at the time to figure out why it was wrong. Now, I know there aren't enough details for this to make sense. It doesn't have to make sense. The takeaway is that a wrong answer, a failure, has helped me solve a real-world problem for a client today. There's an adage that we learn more from our mistakes. I don't know if that's true, but I do know they can be quite helpful. So when we make mistakes, we can take that in stride, learn, and just keep on keeping on. I was just thinking of how discouraged I got with wrong answers when I studied for the bar, and here one saved the day today. Well, it's really an interesting thing. It was a great comment and very helpful. This is from a successful California bar taker that studied with us a few years ago. And I really got to thinking about that idea about wrong answers and how we use them. And wrong answers can be incredibly valuable after you've passed the bar, but also while you're studying for the bar. So I wanted to talk about 5 quick principles for how to properly use wrong answers, because I find that a lot of people don't use them correctly, and they actually end up causing more problems than helping out. So here are the 5 things that I think impact wrong answers, or the ways that we use them and can use them better. The first thing to understand about wrong answers is that they are not predictive. Certainly not in this course. I would say generally in most courses they're not. One of the things that happens is that bar takers come to me and they say, well, I got X number of questions wrong in my practice. Out of 25 questions, I missed 10 or whatever the number might be. And they're sort of, long-faced and sad about it. And my response typically is, I don't care. Not because I'm callous and unfeeling. I don't care because it actually doesn't predict anything to me. In our course, when you're doing practice questions, the purpose of the question is actually to help you learn the law. It is not to predict your performance on an exam, in this case, months away from now. But unfortunately, what happens is that some people, and law students and lawyers are particularly prone to this, tend to view everything as a test, as a competition, as an evaluation. And truthfully, it's not. The only evaluation is at the end of February and the end of July. And so as a result, we tend to take these answers and say, well, they must be predictive. If I miss a certain number of questions, that means I'm going to miss the same number or more on the actual bar exam. That isn't true. When we track our students' performance over the years, what we find is there's absolutely no correlation. We have had students consistently get very poor scores on their practice questions and pass the exam. By the same token, we've had people do very well on the practice questions and fail the exam. Near the end of our course, we will actually give you a series of tests, full-length actual exams, which we have calibrated and correlated over the years, and which have a high statistical probability of being predictive. But for right now, certainly as we're talking today, no questions that you do are predictive. And that's true even if you're writing an essay. If you write a bad essay today, you get the wrong answer, you miss something, it doesn't predict anything. It's literally not predictive. So the first thing you've got to understand about wrong answers is they don't predict your outcomes, and don't treat them that way. Don't make them into something that they're not. Make sense? Okay. The second thing to understand about wrong answers is that they act like radar, like a beacon. They are feedback systems for you. I wear this goofy thing on my wrist, not because I think it's attractive, obviously, but because it gives me feedback. It tells me how many steps I take a day. It tells me how many times I get up during the night. It tells me all sorts of things. It tells me what my heart rate is, all sorts of other interesting information. That is all feedback. And here's one of the interesting things that's happened to me. It used to be that I walked about maybe 3,000, 4,000 steps a day. That was it. Then I got one of these devices and I started seeing how many steps a day I was taking, and being the competitive type A person I am, I said, well, if I did 3,000, I could do 3,500 and then 4,000 and so on. Today, I know some of you will find this hard to believe, I actually walk 15,000 steps a day plus everything else I do in life. And I do it in large part because I've gotten feedback. And the feedback is when I do that, I feel better. I get these steps. There's a lot of things that happen. My heart rate is better. There's all sorts of things that go on. But I wouldn't know that without the feedback. Well, when you do a question, whether it's multiple choice or essay, and you get a wrong answer, instead of going, oh, this is so bad. Oh, I'm terrible. I can't do it, right? And you create that world. You go into your Billy Bob trance. Instead of that, if you say, oh man, that's feedback. That's so cool. I learned something. So I got some information that I needed and I can use that. And that got me to thinking about a classic joke, and I couldn't remember exactly how the joke went. So I Googled it. Okay. And I want to read you this joke because it's so good and it's so appropriate for this. And here's how the joke goes. Worried that their son was too optimistic, the parents of a little boy took him to a psychiatrist. And in an attempt to dampen the boy's spirits, the psychiatrist showed him into a room piled high with nothing but horse manure. Instead of displaying distaste, the little boy clambered to the top of the pile and began digging. What are you doing? The psychiatrist asked. With all this manure, the little boy replied, beaming, there must be a pony in here somewhere. I love that joke. Now, I've told it without using the word manure before, but you get the idea. But here's the thing. When you start doing questions and you're getting them wrong, instead of thinking to yourself, oh, this is bad, right? It's not predictive. If you start saying, oh, this is great. I've just discovered something I didn't know from before, and this is going to help me learn. This is going to give me something new to pick up and understand and be able to work with. How cool is that, right? It's feedback. It's a way of identifying what you need to be working on, where your focus needs to go, versus, oh my gosh, I got to do everything all over again the same way, multiple times, just broad general lack of information. So treat wrong answers as this great opportunity to learn. Treat it as feedback. How do you do that? Well, I recommend that you keep a journal. And as you miss a question, go ahead and instead of trying to recite or memorize a rule, which I know some people would try to do, I would rather you take the principle of law that controls that answer and jot that down in your journal, because that's the piece that you need to learn. That's what's important, not memorizing the rule. And by using that feedback, what you'll discover is you get better and better. When you get feedback on an essay, either by reviewing it against a model answer or by talking with me about it, in that process, the goal of the feedback is that you take the feedback, you absorb it, you integrate it, and then you move on and add it the next time that you work. As long as your work is getting better, then you're making progress, right? And that's what we're looking for when you're writing or when you're doing multiple choice questions or any part of your studies. So that's the second way to deal with wrong answers. Treat them as a feedback system. Look for the pony that's in there somewhere. The third thing about wrong answers that I think I just have to say explicitly is that you have to embrace your errors. You cannot fear them. Some people are so afraid of making a mistake that they literally won't do anything. They're paralyzed by it. Look, you may know people that have taken the bar or are studying right now, and they can't bring themselves to write an essay or to do a performance test or to take practice questions. Why? Because they're terrified that they're going to get something wrong, they're going to miss it, and somehow that will be a reflection on them. Not only is it predictive, but it's giving them the wrong feedback that they're bad or stupid or whatever it might be. When you embrace your errors, when you say, oh man, this is something I can learn from, what a great opportunity for me. If you don't fear it, then it loses its power over you. It's literally when we let things grow bigger and bigger in our brains, and so sort of the unspoken fears become so large that we don't know what to do with them. And that's when they really get out of control. And that's when they begin to dominate our thinking and our approach. Perhaps you've seen the stories of baseball players. There was a famous baseball player a few years ago. He was a second baseman, and he was a professional, major leaguer. And all of a sudden, he couldn't throw the ball from his position between first and second base over to the first baseman. He started throwing wildly over his head, down on the ground, everywhere. It was incredible. It was all mental. There was nothing physical about it. What happened was that he became so afraid of making a mistake that every time he picked up the ball, he started thinking about it, and he couldn't do it anymore. And eventually he was out of the game. The same thing happens to golfers, I'm told. They get something called the yips. They start thinking too much. They overthink. They become so afraid of missing that they can't possibly make it. I'm watching in the Final Four college basketball players who are faced with incredible pressure at the end of the game to make a free throw. Well, the best free throw shooters literally are the ones that grab the ball, walk to the line, and shoot. They don't stop and think about it and think, oh my God, I could miss it. It could hit the rim, and this could happen, and this could happen. But I see bar takers all the time who want to dwell on their mistakes, that dwell on their errors, that are so absolutely obsessed with the mistakes that they just can't get around them. So if you let the wrong answers control you, if you're not willing to just embrace them and then let go of them, if you fear making a mistake, you're going to make the mistake. You remember when Wile E. Coyote goes chasing after Roadrunner, and Roadrunner goes around the corner of the mountain, but Wile E. goes straight off the mountain, and he's running in thin air. He's happy. Everything's good. And what does he do? He looks down. He looks up. That moment, right? Until you if you fear or embrace your errors, then you got a problem. Until then, you're fine. It's okay to make mistakes. Part of the learning process of studying is to make mistakes. Don't be afraid of it. Fourth thing I want to say about wrong answers. I think you need to review answers even when you get the question right. Now, this one's a little counterintuitive. I know that there are people who say, well, I only look at an answer if I got it wrong. That's not something I want you to do. If you're doing a multiple choice question and you answer the question and you get it right, I want you to look at the answer explanations for the wrong choices as well. Why? Because in those explanations for the wrong choices, you've got some definition and explanation and nuance that will help reinforce why you got the question right, but also to help you see where you wouldn't want to go. So it's important, I think, when you're studying to do a question, give your answer, and then go immediately to read the answer explanations. And if you're in our course, as you all are, we've got answer explanations for every choice. If you happen to be studying in a way where you don't have that, well, it's a little tougher, but I think you can still do some analysis of what those other options might have been and why they weren't right. The point is that if you're reviewing even the right answers as well as the wrong answers, now, regardless of whether you've got a question right or wrong in practice, you're doing exactly the same thing. I often challenge people at the end of their studies to try different ways of taking these tests. And I say to them, try my approach of intuitive answers versus your own method of trying to, wrestle them to the ground. And here's the thing. It's practice. So even if you get a question wrong, you're going to look at the answer explanation. And if you get it right, you're going to look at the answer explanation. You end up in the same spot either way when it's in practice. So there's no harm to that. In other words, we take away the sting of a wrong answer because we're going to do the same work whether we get a question right or wrong. And by doing that, I think you take away so much of the power of these wrong answers to make you feel like you're wrong or you're less than if you're reviewing the answer, even when you get it right. And then the final thing I want to say about wrong answers is that essentially, whenever you've got a wrong answer, your task, your goal should be, how do I reduce the explanation for that wrong answer to a guiding legal principle? Now, this is a subtlety, but it's really important. What a lot of people do when they miss a question, particularly a multi-state question, is they say, oh, well, I didn't know the elements to that, so I need to memorize those elements. That won't work. What you want to do is go a step deeper. You want to look at the principle that guides that. let me tell you something about a product that we've got in our course. It's called the nutshells. They're part of the course. And for those of you that are just starting your studies, we're not in the nutshells yet, but they're condensed mini outlines of the multistate subjects. The way that we created those actually started back in the 1970s at Harvard Law School when Smith, McLaughlin, Hart, my mentors, sat down and started looking at the first set of multistate questions. And they brilliantly, I think, figured out that this was not a test of how many rules you could memorize. And they started saying right from the beginning, what's the principle that guided the creation of this question? And they started extracting those principles and they put them into these small outlines that they called nutshells. Well, we've developed and refined the nutshells over the, oh my God, almost 50 years since they started. And they're really, really effective. These nutshells are principles of law that control the answers to questions. If you understand the principle, you are so much further ahead than if you've tried to memorize a whole set of random disconnected rules, because the principles literally control the answer. And the more you intuitively understand the principle, the easier it is to get a correct answer. So what a lot of bar takers do is that they take a question, they miss it, they may not review it because they're afraid to find out more about it. They don't want to see the bad news, but maybe they get to that point and they do look at it, and maybe they get deep enough to figure out what's going on. And then they say, oh, they've come all that way. They're right at the point where they can get real value out of this experience. And they go, oh, well, I just need to memorize a rule. It won't work. When you get to that stage, you want to go one step further beyond the rule and say, what's the principle behind this? What is it that makes this question or this answer choice right and the other choices wrong? That's a principle, not a rule. And if you can start identifying those principles, putting them in your journal, making notes of them, being aware of them, you will see that the principles reassert themselves over and over and over again. This is also true with essay writing. There are principles of law that they're testing. I really see a lot of this on the uniform bar exam in their essays. You'll get 3 or 4 calls of the question, and each one is really just testing one principle of law, not one element or one rule, but one principle of law. And if you understand that principle, then you see how it's manipulated for both the plaintiff and the defendant, or party A and party B. And you can make arguments and use the law and get a much more effective answer. So this final step of reducing wrong answers to principles really ties the package together. So here's what we're saying. Wrong answers are not predictive. Use them instead as a feedback system. Embrace your errors. Don't fear them. Review an answer even if you get it right, and reduce your wrong answers to principles, not rules. If you do that, you're going to get great results, I think, and wrong answers can be really meaningful for you. And later, when you're practicing law, you'll be finding that even those wrong answers can help you tell the partners at the big, huge law firms where to shove it. And on that happy note, we'll finish up for today. It's been great seeing all of you. Well, there you have it. I hope everybody found today's message about the right way to use wrong answers helpful. Gives you some things to think about, doesn't it? And some ways to really approach that a little bit differently. Now, if you'd like to know more about what we do at Celebration Bar Review, we invite you to check out our website at celebrationbarreview.com, and look forward to seeing you next week along the extra mile for bar exam takers. Until then, bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.